Sorry, I don't speak German, so I'll be speaking in English, and I got the gesture of your discussion. First of all, I'd like to say that you're traveling to the area, seeing it in practical and how it's developing. I think it's very, very useful, both for us in the region and also for the revolutionary Marxists in Europe. So that first-hand experience is going to be very helpful in order to develop how we can intervene in future in this area. Secondly, on the question of Rosa Luxemburg, I think generally I agree with what she criticized the Bolsheviks, in particular on the question of Constituent Assembly, which was the same idea that for us as Marxists, there is no separation between socialism and democracy. It's one thing. And then that was the critic of Rosa Luxemburg on that occasion as well, and that previous thing I think is correct. On the question of, I have written a document, a short document for today. It's called Where Do We Stand When a Military Attack of Imperialism Takes Place Against Underdeveloped Countries. Now this is, I think, a very important issue now. The reason is we are getting some confused positions in the part of the revolutionary left, the Marxists in Europe, when there is a threat of an attack in underdeveloped countries or when there is an attack. What has happened, the recent occasion, there was a threat of attack of imperialism against Syria just about 2 months ago. Suddenly, the whole revolutionary left came with various positions on that issue. Some directly or indirectly defended the regime of Syria. Some directly or indirectly defended the position of imperialism. So this confusion, first of all, it stops us having a united position, the united Marxist position in the face of this threat or attack. Secondly, and most importantly, is giving a wrong signal to the socialists in the area. How can just imagine if there is a threat in Iran, when the socialists in Iran look at European, looking for solidarity from Europe, from the revolutionary left, suddenly you get stability of United Kingdom defending the Iranian regime, for example, and on the other hand, we get some other revolutionaries defending imperialism. So that is a very important issue that we are facing as far as the revolutionary left and the Marxists is concerned in Europe. Now, the reason this confusion exists, I think, is this: there is a theoretical crisis of Marxism amongst the left in Europe. There is a need for reshuffling Marxism and updating Marxism, and that is lacking. So what is happening is this, that many of the revolutionary Marxists, although they have gone ahead and created international organizations with 20, 30 organizations all over the world, but their intervention within the proletarian in particular, and also in relation to the situation in the underdeveloped countries, is very, very weak. And also, theoretically, they are totally wrong at many occasions. Now, the reason for that is this, that if we ask them why they are defending, for example, Saddam Hussein or Syrian Assad regime and so on, some directly defend, and some make it very vague. They say, we defend, for example, if there is an attack of imperialism, we defend Syria. We defend Iran. So what does it mean? I mean, as far as Marxist is concerned, we don't defend a country. What? Are we defending the trees and the mountains of Iran if there is an attack? There is a class war in this sort of region. We have to either defend the proletariat in these regions against imperialism intervention, or side with imperialism. I mean, that should be clear. I mean, there is no situation that we defend Iran or Syria. And when we ask them where they get this idea from, they argue, well, in 1878, Marx had taken such a position in relation to Russo-Turkish war, and then Trotsky in 1935 defended utopia against the Italian fascists, or Trotsky in 1938 defended even fascist Brazil against imperialism, UK imperialism, British imperialism. So this is the argument they put forward. So these arguments, of course, these arguments put forward by Lenin, Marx, and Trotsky at that period, I think generally it was correct. However, that was a different period. So therefore, from that time, they had certain analysis of imperialism. At that time, we had classical imperialism, monopoly capitalist imperialism in that period. From the beginning of the century, we had imperialism coming with the situation after plundering, after exporting the consumer goods at certain periods, 17th, 18th century. At the 20th century, because of this plundering, because of this very rapid development of industry in the West, we had the situation that as Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg and Helmut was talking about, the question of cartels developing, monopoly capitalism developing. They were fixing the sort of prices in their own country in order to diminish the competition. So as a result, the imperialism was left with huge amount of finance capital, that is overproduction of capital in that imperialist countries. So what do? Usually when they are in crisis, they go to the third world. They want to take this money in order to do something in the third world. So again, for the third period, they go, but this time they are going after the in Iran, for example, they go after oil on this, various sort of intervention in order to get gold from some countries and some investments in order to extract the raw material in these countries. So as a result of this intervention at a specific time, what has happened is this: because of this intervention, the imperialism needed the control over this money. They are going to, for example, in Iran, to invest on the oil and to extract this oil and take it to the imperialist countries. To have the control, they have to have no competition in the area. Like, for example, in Iran, we saw the various formation of the bourgeoisie developing. A national bourgeoisie in this region. National bourgeoisie didn't want imperialism to come and have a control over their sort of production and their activities. So what imperialism did, they went and brought a capitalist period sort of governors, like a clergy and some thieves and some various sort of elements in order to govern that country while they are extracting oil, for example, in Iran. So because of that, we had a genuine national bourgeoisie in the area. We had, for the first time, for example, in Iran, we had a constitutional revolution which was suppressed immediately, but then we see in various countries, in Egypt, in Syria, in various areas that the intervention of imperialism took place as such. We saw the emergence of national bourgeoisie. So at that period, Lenin, Trotsky was talking about, if imperialism attacks, we have to defend the national bourgeoisie here. Although we are against national bourgeoisie, although they are bourgeois, some of them are reactionary even, but this big oppressed nation and governments and state is coming, and the success will destroy any opening of the in future proletariat, etc. If there is national bourgeoisie developing, which is generally anti-imperialist, therefore there is a possibility of development of capitalism, and also we will get the proletariat developing, and then in the future the proletariat will fight against the bourgeoisie. So therefore this idea, this line of defending national bourgeoisie belongs to beginning of 20th century. It's Nothing to do with what's happening today. Because from the Second World War, the crisis of capitalism, imperialism changed. They went through another period because of this permanent industrial revolution. As we can see, immediately they are producing many commodities in a large scale. What the crisis of imperialism faced with is the crisis of accumulation of means of production. That means they have left with a lot of machinery in their hand. They didn't know what to do with it, because they had to develop the machinery in order to match this very rapid industrial revolution. It's a permanent industrial revolution is taking place up to today. So as you can see, we have talked about the first industrial revolution in Europe and the second industrial revolution and third industrial revolution, which is informatic and so on. But now nobody talks about a fourth industrial revolution because it's permanent. Because of this permanency of this technology development, imperialism is in another over-accumulation crisis. And that is, they have left at the beginning of, after the war, World War II, 1950s onwards, they were left with some machinery that they didn't know what them to do with it. Therefore, again, they have to go to third world countries in order to reuse these machineries, this over-accumulation of the means of production. So, what they do, what can they do? They go to third world country like Iran. There is no bourgeoisie, there is no structure to use this. So therefore, they set a foundation which belongs actually directly at that time to US imperialism called Ford Foundation. They went all over the world, from Iran, Egypt, and Syria to Far East, Indonesia, Philippines, etc., to Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, etc., with one aim: to create, to impose a bourgeois state from above. Because bourgeoisie usually has come through a national bourgeois revolutions in the West. They have gone through against feudalism. There was a bourgeois revolutions in the West. But this time, because to resolve this crisis, they went and created some grounds to send their over-accumulation of the machinery to these countries. So what they needed to do, they started land reforms. Land reforms, it happened in Iran during the Shah's time, but it happened all over the world, in Brazil and so on. You see, about this time, this Ford Foundation has given these countries a lot of money. They started land reform in order to release the peasantry from the villages to the cities for the labor force, so therefore they are ready to become proletariat. They monetary funds, they put a lot of money by creating banks who lended money to some people, and these some people, bourgeoisie, they look for bourgeoisie, whoever they could get a hold of, some various merchants, some various pre-capitalist sort of elements, some thieves, anybody they could put their hands up in Iran, they did that. They lent a lot of money and they started some sort of factories. But the factories which could accommodate this overproduction. So at that time, from this time onwards, we don't have the question of national bourgeoisie anymore. What we have is state over-imposed by imperialism in order to resolve its own problem. So our theories and Marxist theories doesn't work anymore. What we're having a war between imperialism and a bourgeois state which is being created by imperialism. So therefore we can't develop this, because we cannot talk about defending a bourgeois state which is being created by imperialism. It's got nothing to do with national bourgeoisie. National bourgeoisie potentially was anti-imperialist, and potentially had the support of many thousands of millions of people in that particular country. So that line of Lenin and Trotsky or Marx doesn't work anymore at this sort of situation. We have imperialism attacking a reactionary regime, so therefore our line should be very clear. It's a defeatist line. We say down with imperialism and down with that regime. We want this regime to be fallen. Why? Because it's a repressive regime. It's not national bourgeoisie anymore. It is a regime which has been created by imperialism itself. Imperialism comes into conflict with some of these regimes, and usually what they do, they don't touch the state in these countries. If they come into conflict, they change the regime only. So we can see a lot of regime changes. Like for example in Libya, a regime change, but the state, capitalist state, which was created by imperialism, stays intact. We say even in Iran, we saw regime changes. Really, there was no revolution as such, didn't succeed. Bourgeoisie state. The Shah's regime went, and Khomeini's regime came in its place. So therefore regime, as you know, as Marxists, we differentiate between state and the regime. Regime is, riding on the state. The state is the permanent and historical sort of elements of the bourgeoisie. So what our position should be at the moment, at this sort of period, at this sort of situation, that imperialism, first of all, has created states that are bourgeois state, and reaction be true and true, and also they are very, very repressive, and also in these countries, another element is changed since beginning of the 20th century. We have proletariat in this country, a very active and also very very radical proletariat. We have proletariat in Iran, for example, who toppled one of the closest allies to the imperialism. They created for the first time after the after the Russian Revolution, the Soviets in Iran. And that is a very, very new element, and there was no experience of the Soviets in Iran before. So therefore we have that type of proletariat in Syria, in Egypt, in many other countries in the region. We have this sort of situation. So therefore we as revolutionary Marxists, it's very clear where we stand. Very clearly, we shouldn't give vague and unclear messages to these countries that we defend Iran, we defend Syria. It doesn't mean anything. We have to say we defend the proletariat revolution in the area. We are against this reactionary regime. The reactionary regime was suppressing the proletariat and the masses in the area. So therefore, for example, in Iran, that same situation came up a few years ago, that Israel and America was threatening to attack Iran. So suddenly, many of the revolutionaries got confused again. So instead of defending the proletariat as calling for this third camp position, that is neither this nor that, this defeatist line actually. This is our traditional as Marxists and traditional position. When there is two reactionaries fight against each other, we don't take sides. We say soldiers, shoot at your generals in both sides. We are defeatist line. And this is the situation for Third World now, because of the new development of imperialism. And new development of imperialism, we have not reached to it because we have theoretical crisis of Marxism today. And because of that, in fact, we are proposing this a project called Marxist Revival. That means we should really sit and start working theoretically on many aspects of Marxism. And that these positions relates to some sort of lines which are outdated. It's not working anymore. And that is why our crisis is deepening. And that is why, by the way, in these areas like Iran, like Afghanistan, like Syria, and so on, when the genuinely revolutionary people and proletariat see such a confusion of Marxism, it's obvious they go to an alternative. And this alternative usually is the radical Islamist. And it is in fact our fault that the proletariat go towards radical Islamists and Al-Qaeda and this sort of reactionary elements in the region, because we have no alternative. And we are, talking more or less nonsense in relation to the proletariat and socialists in the area. So therefore there is really the time that we reshuffle our ideas. Instead of going and, making this phony organizations, international organizations, and then, selling paper, recruiting people, one or two people, after so many years, after 30, 40 years of preparation, we have no genuine commentary in the world scale to stage the socialist revolution. Everybody, all these organizations, big organizations are absent, are not related to the masses. We have left, okay, we have left the streets to the anarchists. That's what we've done as Marxists. Because we are in confused state, because we are in crisis. So this is the time that we, in fact, same thing that Marx did in his own time. He actually revived communism to the revolutionary communism. He actually cut away from all this wrong, utopian socialists and that sort of, he updated his views actually. He updated communism. That is the task of us at this moment in order to defend the proletariat and prepare for revolution and socialist revolutions all over the world. This is the time. Objectively, people are ready to revolt. They want socialist revolutions, and subjectively, the leadership are at home. They're confused. That is the situation, unfortunate situation in the world scale, and that is what we have to be tackling.